the Weeping River. In a remote countryside surrounded by rolling hills, there was a small river with dark, murky water, winding like a snake slumbering beneath the earth. The locals called it by an ominous name, the Weeping River. No one could remember exactly when the name first appeared, but from generation to generation, stories about the river were passed down, serving as a warning to strangers who ventured into this land. The legend told of a tragedy that took place hundreds of years ago. A large boat carrying dozens of people, including women and children, sank in the river during a stormy night. No one survived, and all the victims were swallowed by the black water, their bodies never found. The villagers believed that their souls were still trapped beneath the river, unable to find peace, bound by suffering and resentment. The river was said to be where they cried out each night. The river was not wide, but it was deep, and its water was cold, as if it had remained unchanged for millennia. By day it was quiet, with only the sound of wind rustling through the trees along its banks. But at night, especially on nights of a full moon, the river seemed to come alive. Villagers claimed they could hear whispers and sighs rising from the riverbed, like the lamentations of restless spirits. Some even swore they had seen figures dressed in white, with long, wet hair, standing on the water, walking slowly before disappearing into the night. The stories of the Weeping River became a warning for all who passed through this land, yet there were always those who dared to defy such tales. A group of young city dwellers, Nam, Tung, Hương, and Hoa, decided to challenge themselves by camping overnight beside the river. They dismissed the tales as mere superstitions spun by the elderly. Nam, the leader of the group, was an adventurer always seeking to explore the unknown. He brought along Hương, a strong-willed girl, though often prone to worry. Tung, Nam's childhood friend, was intelligent but quiet, always calm in any situation. Lastly, there was Hoa, Tung's girlfriend, cheerful and energetic, who had never believed in ghosts or spirits. They came prepared with a large tent, flashlights, and food, ready for what they thought would be a fun and thrilling night. When they arrived, the river revealed itself to be far more ominous than they had expected. Its dark waters reflected the faint light of the rising moon. There was no sound except for the wind whispering through the trees, creating a strange, distant murmur. They set up their tent just a few steps from the riverbank. As the night deepened, the air grew colder, as if something unseen was creeping into the atmosphere. They sat around the campfire, chatting and laughing, but each of them was haunted by the stories they had heard about the river. Hương, despite her usual bravery, felt a growing unease. She stared at the river, where the black water seemed to hide something terrifying beneath its surface. "We shouldn't be here," Hương murmured. But Nam's laughter broke the eerie silence. "Don't worry, those stories are just nonsense. We're here to prove there's nothing to fear. It's just a normal river, and we're going to have an unforgettable night," Nam said, his eyes gleaming with confidence. As midnight came, the full moon rose high in the sky, casting its pale light across the river. At that moment, a cold wind blew through, causing them all to shiver. Suddenly, a series of murmurs echoed from the riverbed, like faint voices mingling with the wind. Tung stood up, staring at the water. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice tense. Hương nodded, her heart racing. "Was that?" "People talking," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Nam scoffed. "Probably just the wind." But no sooner had he spoken than they saw a shadowy figure moving on the surface of the water. It was a faint silhouette, dressed in a long white gown with long black hair dripping wet, slowly walking toward them. Ho screamed, "Who's that?" The figure gave no response, only continued moving closer. Its feet did not touch the ground but glided above the water, sending ripples across the surface. The group stumbled backward in fear, their eyes glued to the apparition. The wind suddenly died, and everything became eerily still. As the figure approached, the moonlight illuminated its pale, ghostly face. Its eyes were hollow, with no pupils, only pure white, as though its soul had long since departed. Its mouth opened slightly, though no sound came out, yet it was clear it was crying out for help, screaming in silence. Water dripped from its gown, the droplets hitting the ground like echoes from the underworld. Shaking, Hoa yelled, "Run! Run now!" But the group seemed frozen in place, unable to move. The ghost drew nearer and nearer, and then from beneath the river, dozens of pale hands reached up, as if trying to drag them all down. Tung screamed in panic, struggling to free himself from the icy hands that wrapped around his ankles. The more he fought, the tighter the hands gripped, pulling him toward the water. Nam and Hoa rushed to help, but it seemed futile. The cold, deathly hands from the earth had the strength of countless tormented souls, dragging Tung slowly toward the river. The water, once still, now churned violently, as if something monstrous beneath was awakening. Ghostly faces began to rise from the surface, their eyes sunken, mouths wide open in endless screams of agony. Pale arms climbed out of the river, crawling toward the group. Hương stood in paralyzed silence, her eyes wide in horror. She could feel the presence of thousands of spirits surrounding her. The wails, the cries of despair rose from every direction, forming a symphony of eternal suffering. Her legs began to feel numb, frozen in place. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream erupted from the river, like a call from the depths of hell. Nam spun around just in time to see Tung being dragged into the water and vanishing completely into the horrific whirlpool. Tung's screams echoed through the stillness of the night, then abruptly ceased, leaving only the haunting sound of the river's rushing waters, as if it had swallowed the last of his life. Nam, Hoa, and Huang stood frozen in place, their minds unable to process what had just unfolded. The nightmare was no longer just a figment of superstition. It was a horrifying reality before their eyes. Nam shouted, "We have to get out of here! Now!" The group bolted back toward their campsite, but the ghosts of the river began rising from its depths, one after another. Pale figures, their bodies decayed by the relentless water, floated through the air like gusts of freezing wind. Moans and sorrowful sighs filled the air, as if the entire area was suffocated by the spirits of those wronged. Hoa stumbled on the damp ground, her eyes blurry with terror. She felt a cold hand clutching her ankle. Nam and Huang rushed to pull her up, but the ghostly grip tightened, dragging her toward the riverbank. The water swirled with violent currents as if beckoning for more innocent lives to join the others beneath its surface. Hoa screamed in desperation, "No! Let me go!" She thrashed wildly, her face soaked with tears and terror. Nam and Huang tried with all their strength, but the invisible force from the river was too strong, pulling her toward its depths. Amidst the groans of the dead, a voice suddenly echoed, deep, menacing, filled with bitterness. "You cannot escape. The curse here will never fade. We are dead, but you will remain with us forever." Nam and Huang froze. They couldn't tell where the voice was coming from, but it permeated everything around them, penetrating their minds and making their bodies tremble. Huang cried out, tears streaming down her face. "Why? Why us?" The sinister voice replied, "Because you dared to set foot where vengeance never sleeps. You will be part of the river now, just like us, for eternity." As the voice faded, Hoa was yanked violently into the dark, swirling waters. Nam and Huang could only watch in horror as she disappeared beneath the waves, her last scream swallowed by the river. Then silence fell. No trace of her remained. The water was eerily still, as though nothing had ever happened. Nam looked at Huang, their faces pale with panic and despair. They couldn't understand what was happening or why such horrors had befallen them. All they knew was that the river was no ordinary body of water. It harbored centuries of unspeakable pain and resentment, and they had unwittingly become a part of it. Nam pulled Huang to her feet, his voice trembling. "We need to leave. Now." They ran back the way they had come, but the ghosts from the river continued to follow. The air grew colder with every step, as if something unseen was stalking their every move. Shadows flitted in the mist. Pale faces with empty eyes and trembling lips seemed to call them back to the river's edge. As they reached the edge of the forest, another horrific sight awaited them. Among the thick, gnarled trees, hundreds of ghostly faces emerged from the shadows, surrounding them. Each spirit bore the scars of a violent death, some crushed, some missing eyes, others clutching tattered remnants of the white clothing they had worn when they drowned. Nam and Huang huddled together, trapped between the circle of vengeful spirits. There was no escape, no path left to run. The ghosts moved closer, step by step, their empty eyes filled with malice, watching the living souls with intent. A voice spoke once more, and this time it was clearer than ever. "There is no forgiveness for those who trespass. You will stay here forever." Nam spun around, but before he could see what was behind him, a hand as cold as iron gripped his throat, dragging him back toward the river. Huang screamed, trying to pull him back, but the force was too powerful. Nam was swept into the ground like a leaf caught in a whirlwind. Left alone, collapsed to the ground, trembling uncontrollably. The moans, cries, and insane laughter of the spirits surrounded her, mingling with the howling wind. She knew, deep down, that she would never leave this place. The spirits had claimed her, and now she could only wait for her turn to be pulled into the dark waters. In her final moment, she looked toward the river. The water was once again calm, as though it had never stirred. But she knew better. Beneath that surface, the spirits of the damned were waiting, longing for more souls to join them in their eternal suffering. And then a final scream echoed through the night before fading into the silence. The wailing river still flows, silent and dreadful. The stories are still told, but no one dares approach its banks anymore. The spirits beneath the water continue to moan and cry out in their unending agony, waiting for the next souls foolish enough to step into the cursed land of death.